YouTube has spent the last 2 years telling you that Chinese outboards are about to take over the marine industry, that a Parsun engine costs half as much as a Yamaha and performs just as well, that Mercury and Honda are scrambling to compete, that the boating world is on the verge of a revolution from the east. None of that is what is actually happening. The real story of Chinese outboards is more complicated, more interesting, and significantly different from the version most YouTubers have been selling. Some of it is true. Most of it is exaggeration. And the parts that nobody wants to talk about are the parts you actually need to know before you spend $3,000 on an engine the major dealers refuse to service. This is the truth about Chinese outboards in 2026, with the marketing stripped out and the data left in place. The story YouTube has been telling about Chinese outboards begins with a real foundation, and that foundation is what makes the exaggeration believable. Suzhou Parsun Power Machine Company, founded in 2005 in China's Jiangsu province, has grown over 20 years into one of the largest marine outboard manufacturers in the world. The company produces over 200 different model variants, ranging from small 2.5 horsepower portable engines up through 90 horsepower outboards in the 2-stroke category and 60 horsepower in 4-stroke. Parsun engines are sold under the company's own brand and through OEM relationships under names like HDX and Gulfstream. The factory operates at a scale that the established Japanese and American manufacturers have not seen domestically in decades, with cost structures that allow Chinese outboards to enter Western markets at prices roughly half of comparable Yamaha or Mercury equivalents. That price gap is what fuels every clickbait video on the subject. A Parsun 9.8 horsepower 4-stroke retails in the United Kingdom for around £1,000, while a Tohatsu 9.8 retails for around £1,700. The Parsun engine is dimensionally similar enough that the parts are interchangeable in many cases. The weight matches almost exactly, and on paper the performance specifications appear identical. To a budget-conscious buyer looking at a spec sheet, the Chinese outboard looks like the same product for 40% less money. That single comparison is the foundation of every video claiming Chinese outboards are about to disrupt the marine industry. And it is technically true on the surface. The disruption narrative gets reinforced by visible physical similarities. Parsun outboards are widely described as functionally compatible with Yamaha designs, fitting the same transom brackets, using compatible electrical systems, and sharing similar cylinder head layouts and fuel injection architecture. The major Chinese manufacturers have studied the established Japanese designs carefully and built engines that look, mount, and operate in ways that mirror the products they compete against. This pattern is not unique to outboards. The same approach exists in Chinese automotive, electronics, and tooling industries, where manufacturers identify successful Western or Japanese products and build functional equivalents at lower cost. For small outboards in the 2.5 to 15 horsepower range, the value proposition is genuinely real. A boater who needs a portable engine for a small dinghy, a tender, or a trolling motor is not getting fundamentally different performance from a Parsun than from a Yamaha. Both engines will start, both will run, both will push the boat at the rated speed, or an inflatable that lives in a garage and gets used a dozen times per season on a calm lake. The Chinese outboard delivers acceptable function for substantially less money. This is the segment where the disruption story has the strongest factual backing, and where the YouTube videos are not entirely wrong. But the videos rarely stay in that segment. They extrapolate the small outboard value proposition across the entire horsepower range, claiming Parsun and Hidea engines are about to compete with Yamaha and Mercury at 50 horsepower, 100 horsepower, and beyond. They show spec sheets, price comparisons, and footage of Chinese factories producing thousands of units. The story sounds plausible because the small outboard reality is real. What the videos almost never show is what happens when you take a Chinese outboard out of the protected dinghy use case and ask it to perform the way the brand name engines do. The first crack in the Chinese outboard narrative appears the moment you stop reading spec sheets and start reading service reports. A manufacturing defect runs through the Hidea brand outboards that affects the cooling system in a way most buyers will never see until the engine overheats. The water pump housing on Hidea engines is missing a small locating pin that is present in the Yamaha original. That pin is what holds the stainless steel insert in place inside the housing. When the pin is absent, the insert can rotate slightly during operation, which closes the water outlet that cools the power head. The engine runs hot, the head gasket fails, and the buyer learns that the cheap outboard they bought has a manufacturing flaw the factory never bothered to fix. The defect has been identified across multiple Hidea units by Australian marine importers, who reverse-engineered the problem, And the Chinese factory continues to ship engines with the defect, because correcting it would cost money the cost-cutting business model does not allow. The Parsun 9.8 horsepower 4-stroke, which YouTube videos hold up as the equivalent of the Tohatsu 9.8, has a quality control issue where engines have arrived from the dealer disassembled in cardboard boxes. One Australian buyer purchased a brand new Parsun for a 12-foot dinghy, opened the shipping packaging, and found the engine in 2 cardboard boxes requiring assembly. The customer returned the engine, bought a Tohatsu, and the experience became a forum reference point for what Chinese outboard buyers can expect at the lower price tiers. The corrosion problem is more systematic. Boat owners in the United Kingdom and Australia who bought Parsun and Hidea engines for saltwater use have reported significant corrosion forming inside the leg and powerhead within 24 months of light use, even with regular freshwater flushing and standard maintenance. One owner with 3.5 years of regular service on a Parsun 15 horsepower reported significant internal leg corrosion at only 27 hours of total operation. The metal alloys used in Chinese outboards are reported as being lower grade than the Japanese equivalents they are designed to copy. The dimensional specifications match the originals, while the material specifications do not. A Parsun engine and a Yamaha engine can look identical from the outside, while corroding at completely different rates from the inside. The structural quality problems extend through the entire engine. Independent marine technicians who have torn down Chinese outboards for service have reported nylon bushings used in places where the Yamaha originals use proper bearings. Fuel hoses fail prematurely across multiple Chinese brands due to lower quality rubber compounds. Plastic levers, dogs, starter locks, and fuel filters break at hour counts where the Japanese equivalents have not even started showing wear. The assembly process at the Chinese factories has been described in industry reporting as inconsistent, with reports of factories forgetting to install keys, leaving caps untightened on gearboxes, missing bolt sealants, and shipping engines with mechanical components partially assembled. None of this shows up on the spec sheet. All of it shows up at hour 50. Then there is the compliance problem. Chinese outboards historically have not met United States EPA and California Air Resources Board emission standards, which is the primary reason Parsun, Hidea, and similar brands have a limited presence in the American market, compared to Australia and Europe. Shipping containers full of Chinese outboards have been seized at American ports for failing to provide the emission certifications required by federal regulation. The engines that do reach American buyers often arrive through gray market channels that bypass the certification requirements entirely, which means the buyer has no warranty protection and no legal path to recourse when the engine fails. By the time a Chinese outboard owner discovers the engine has a problem, the financial collapse has usually already happened. The dealer network is the first wall the buyer hits. Yamaha, Mercury, Suzuki, and Honda have spent decades building dealer infrastructure across the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, with parts distribution warehouses, factory-trained technicians, and warranty service available within reasonable driving distance of nearly every coastal market. Parsun and Hidea have a tiny fraction of that infrastructure. In the United Kingdom, Bill Hyam Marine handles Parsun distribution, and his reputation in the industry is genuinely good. But step outside of the small network of authorized dealers and the buyer is on their own. Independent marine repair shops have repeatedly reported that they refuse to service Chinese outboards at all, citing the lack of service manuals, the difficulty of sourcing parts, and the labor cost of figuring out non-standard internal architectures. One forum exchange from an Australian repair shop captured the dynamic when a customer mentioned bringing in a Parsun for service. The mechanic asked the customer not to ask him to work on it. The parts problem compounds the dealer problem. Replacement components for Parsun, Hidea, and the smaller Chinese brands are described across multiple international forums as nearly impossible to source through normal supply channels. A water pump impeller that costs $20 and ships next day for a Yamaha or Mercury engine can take weeks to locate for a Chinese outboard, requires direct ordering from importers, and sometimes arrives as a different specification than what was ordered because the factory has changed components without updating the part numbers. For the buyer who needs the engine running for the weekend, this is not a minor inconvenience. It is a structural problem that turns the boat into a dock ornament, until the part eventually shows up. Then the resale value collapse begins. Used Parsun and Hidea outboards have almost no resale market in countries where the Japanese brands dominate. Forum users have noted boats with Parsun outboards on the Australian used market dropping in asking price by $10,000 over time, with industry commentary attributing the depreciation in part to the Chinese engine on the transom. The math is brutal. A buyer who pays £1,000 for a new Parsun saves £700 compared to the Tohatsu equivalent at purchase. 5 years later, the Tohatsu retains substantial resale value while the Parsun is effectively worthless. The total cost of ownership, factoring in resale recovery, often exceeds the cost of just buying the Japanese engine in the first place. The warranty situation makes the financial picture worse. Chinese outboard warranties typically run 2 years, which sounds reasonable on paper. The problem is that the importers who sell the engines at the lower price points often go out of business, change names, or stop importing within that warranty window. Buyers have reported cases where engine failures within the warranty period led to dealers being closed, or importers having changed names by the time service was needed, with no path to recourse from the manufacturer in China. The 2-year warranty becomes meaningless when the entity responsible for honoring it disappears between purchase and failure. The collapse plays out the same way on small outboards and dinghies and on larger engines pushed into harder service. The buyer saves real money at the moment of purchase. Within 2 to 4 years, the savings are eaten by service difficulties, parts unavailability, premature corrosion, and zero resale recovery. The total cost of ownership math that looked attractive on the spec sheet becomes a liability the moment the engine needs anything beyond fresh fuel. To understand why YouTube has been wrong about Chinese outboards, you have to understand what makes the Chinese outboard story so commercially attractive to content creators in the first place. The disruption narrative is one of the most reliable formulas for generating views on YouTube. A small underdog company is taking on the established giants. The product is half the price. The major manufacturers are running scared. The viewer who clicks the video gets to feel like they are discovering a secret the establishment is hiding. This narrative works because it has been true in many other industries. Chinese electronics genuinely disrupted the American consumer technology market. Chinese tools have undercut the established American tool manufacturers, and Chinese electric vehicles are reshaping the global automotive industry in ways that make traditional manufacturers nervous. Applying the same template to outboards generates clicks because viewers have seen the disruption story play out elsewhere and assume it must be playing out here. The reason it does not apply cleanly to outboards is structural. The marine outboard market has characteristics that make Chinese disruption substantially harder than in other consumer categories. The first characteristic is the operating environment. Outboard motors run in salt water, at full load, in heat, with vibration, often for hours at a time with no easy way to stop and pull over when something goes wrong. A boat 3 miles offshore with a failed engine creates a safety hazard, and the tolerance for product failure in marine outboards is dramatically lower than in consumer electronics or even automotive applications. The buyer who saves money on a Chinese television tolerates a shorter lifespan because the failure mode is annoying. The buyer who saves money on a Chinese outboard is gambling with their ability to get home from the water. The second characteristic is the service requirement. Outboard motors require regular maintenance, occasional repairs, and constant access to spare parts. The Japanese manufacturers have spent decades building service ecosystems that turn engine ownership into a manageable experience. Chinese manufacturers have not built equivalent ecosystems, and the value of an outboard motor is inseparable from the service infrastructure that supports it. A Chinese outboard with no dealer network, no parts supply, and no qualified technicians is functionally less valuable than a Japanese outboard at twice the price, regardless of what the spec sheet shows. The third characteristic is the regulatory environment. American and European emission standards for marine engines have been getting progressively tighter, and meeting those standards requires significant engineering investment in fuel injection systems, emission controls, and certification testing. The major Japanese manufacturers have absorbed this regulatory burden because their volume justifies the investment. Chinese manufacturers operating at lower price points often cannot justify the same investment, which is why their products struggle to enter the United States market through legitimate channels, and why gray market imports often arrive without the required certifications. The fourth characteristic, and possibly the most important, is the value calculation across the ownership lifecycle. The Chinese outboard advantage is concentrated entirely at the purchase moment. Every other phase of ownership, including service, repair, parts availability, and resale, favors the Japanese alternative. The total cost of ownership math, properly calculated across a 5 to 10-year ownership period, frequently shows the Chinese outboard costing more than the Japanese alternative, even though the purchase price was significantly lower. This is the calculation YouTube videos almost never run, because it eliminates the disruption narrative the videos depend on for clicks. The result is a market reality that does not fit the YouTube story. Chinese outboards have a real and legitimate position in the small portable engine segment. They do not, in 2026, pose a credible threat to Yamaha, Mercury, Honda, or Suzuki at the horsepower levels and use cases that drive the bulk of marine industry revenue. The future of Chinese outboards in 2026 and beyond is not the revolution YouTube has been selling, but it is also not nothing. In the small portable engine segment, from 2.5 horsepower up through about 20 horsepower, Chinese outboards will continue to gain market share in price-sensitive applications. Dinghies, tenders, small fishing boats, and recreational use cases where engine failure is inconvenient rather than dangerous are exactly the segment where the Chinese value proposition holds. Buyers who understand the trade-offs and accept the limited service network can save real money in this category, and the Japanese manufacturers have largely conceded the lower end of the small outboard market to Chinese competition. Above 20 horsepower, the picture changes completely. The major Chinese manufacturers have not yet demonstrated the engineering capability to compete with Yamaha or Mercury at 50 horsepower or above. The metallurgy problems, the assembly inconsistencies, the parts availability gaps, and the service infrastructure deficits all become more consequential as horsepower increases and use cases get more demanding. The commercial fishing boat, the offshore center console, the larger pontoon, and the family runabout will not be powered by Chinese engines in any meaningful numbers within the next decade. The longer-term picture depends on whether Chinese manufacturers invest in the engineering and infrastructure required to compete at the higher horsepower tiers. The path is theoretically open. The Japanese manufacturers were once seen as cheap copies of American outboard designs, and they spent decades building the quality and service networks that eventually displaced the American brands. Chinese manufacturers could follow the same path. Whether they will requires a level of investment in engineering, materials, and dealer infrastructure that the current cost-cutting business model has not yet shown a willingness to make. The honest summary, with the YouTube hype stripped out, is that Chinese outboards in 2026 are a legitimate budget option for small portable engines, and a poor choice for anything beyond that. They are not about to take over the marine industry, and the buyers who understand exactly where the value is real and where it disappears are the ones who avoid the financial collapse that catches everyone else. The marine industry runs on a simple truth that gets lost in every disruption narrative. The cost of an outboard motor is not what you pay at the dealer. It is what the engine costs you across every hour you own it, every part you have to replace, every weekend you cannot get on the water, and every dollar you fail to recover when you finally sell the boat. By that measure, the cheapest engine on the showroom floor is rarely the cheapest engine to own. The buyers who already know this are the buyers who never had to learn it the expensive way. Now you know it too.